Just these.
We just have these.
There's two. We can share.
Yeah, you can take one and we can just, there's like, we have four. We're over mic'd.
Are we going to do introductions?
Yes, so.
With everybody?
But when they ask a question, they say who they are, what they're studying, you know.
Okay, cool.
It's okay. We're all here.
Hi.
We love nutrition.
It's the first panel? Yeah. Now, curveball. Set the tone.
The lyrics of the song.
The music's in the back.
How about you all share this message? And then we'll keep one for Q&A running. Perfect.
Yeah, you had to stick the wireless mic so you can
Yeah. Mine is. Yeah, right here.
Okay. It was delayed. I don't control the remote.
Is that B? Is that B right there? No.
Thank you.
Maybe. Yeah. Is that B?
B's a person?
Yeah. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see exactly. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to Food Literacy for All. Tonight is our first panel of the semester. So we're thrilled to have so many awesome panelists here in town from Detroit. And a couple quick announcements to get us going for the evening. Again, if this is your first time, Food Literacy for All is a class at U of M that's free and open to the public. Please RSVP each week. We film each class. You can Google Food Literacy for All and you'll find all the videos. Actually, I just looked today and it looks like the class sessions already from this semester have been watched in total a couple thousand times. So glad to see people are watching them. You can join the conversation on Twitter if you're into that. # Food Literacy for All. Free rides between Ann Arbor and Detroit. Contact our friend Kabibi at the Detroit Food Policy Council. Here's her email if you are interested in that or if you know someone who might be. Reminder, especially this is for the community members because I have a feeling the students are aware. We're skipping next week. U of M is on spring break. So our next speaker, there's some cheering out there. So our next speaker is going to be in 2 weeks. Okay, the UM Sustainable Food Program. Raise your hand. Is anyone here involved with the UM Sustainable Food Program? All right, I see a couple hands. So this is the student umbrella organization for all of the sustainable food work on campus run by students. They're looking for new faces. You can apply for a paid position. You can see details here. And one last plug for the SFSI internships. You can send me your resume and cover letter, and you can talk to Jerry about it because these interns will be in part at her town, or at her farm, and also at D-Town Farm, and also this year working with the U of M campus farm. So we're very excited about this partnership. Thank you again so much to our sponsors that make this class happen. And I'll pass the mic off to Jerry to introduce our panel and panelists.
I think I'll stand. How y'all doing? Okay, spring break is next week. Y'all supposed to be yelling. Yeah! Welcome back. I'm glad to be back. I've been gone for 2 weeks. And so I'm very excited to be back with you tonight and to have my friends from Detroit here representing Detroit. And we're going to speak about, just have a conversation about something that is very important to all of us, and that's climate change. And so how that impacts the urban grower and just agriculture in general. Before we start the discussion and before well, let me introduce our panel first, just to, so that you will know who is sitting at the table. We have Michelle Martinez, who is an activist, environmentalist, and someone who is very, very active with the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. So we're very happy to have you with us, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here. We have Naeem Edwards, who is the director of the MSU Extension Detroit Partnership for Food, Learning and Innovation Center in Detroit. Again, we're very happy to have you here. And we have Ashley Atkinson, who is a co-director for Keep Growing Detroit. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Thank you. I mentioned that we're going to be talking about climate change and how it impacts and affects our environment and agriculture. So I wanted to just start by framing the conversation a little bit by talking about what's happening around the country. And again, this is not a lot of detail, but just to give you some general information of what we're seeing. So we know that around the country, farmers are experiencing significant financial losses due to the trade wars and climate change. This past spring, 2019, was the worst rain, flood, unseasonable snow events that we ever experienced in the Midwest. And this is according to the American Farm Bureau of 2019. 2,000 acres of land was prevented from being planted due to these adverse climate weather events. That's a lot of acreage. Actually I said 2,000, but it's 2 million acres of land. That's a lot of acreage. And that's a lot of food that didn't get grown. Bankruptcies are up 24% around the country. Farmers are experiencing financial problems in their families. They're losing their farms. They're having to file bankruptcy. They're being foreclosed on their equipment. But what's also interesting is, and I don't think a lot of people think about this, is the mental illness and health behavior issues that come out of this. The suicide rate is up around the country, and Farm Aid Bureau is getting crisis calls every day. They say it's about 109 calls a day. That is a lot of distressed farmers. And so, coming back to Michigan, we know that Michigan is getting hotter. We have seen a rise in the temperature of our waters. We know that in the cities where there's a lot of cement, that we have these very hot heat indexes. And so, again, this is affecting not only our economy, but our agriculture, our public health, our Great Lakes, and just the way that we are able to function day to day. Our economy is being greatly impacted. We have our fruit crops in Michigan have been, since 2012, subjected to extreme heats, extreme frost, and cold climates over the last 6 or 7 years, sometimes to the point that entire fruit crops have been destroyed. I don't know if you, how many of you are familiar with Blake apple orchards in Romeo? They've been around, I think, almost 100 years. And it was about 5 years ago, they were completely wiped out. Their entire crop of trees were completely wiped out, and they were almost bankrupt from that weather event. So it's a very real situation in terms of how these weather events affect our climate here and our agriculture, as well as our economy and our lifestyle. And what's interesting is that for many of our farmers and growers, they are mature. I have to be careful about what I say. I don't want to call them old, because sometimes I say I'm old, but they're mature. And so young people like you, or maybe a little older, aren't thinking about following in your parents' footsteps in terms of farming. You're doing other things. You want to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, things like that. So the succession plan for farmers is struggling. People are trying to figure out what do they do with their land, not wanting to sell their land to developers because this is generational land and they would like it to be contained within the family. But that is a very economically damaging decision that a lot of farmers are having to make right now, what to do with their land. Looking at some of the other results of climate change, we have planting delays. So for example, I farm in Detroit. We have 6 acres. We are farming on 3.5 acres. For the last 2 years, we've had extreme weather events where we have not been able to do our spring planting until summer because we've had late frost, heat, and then cold, and then rain where the ground stays too wet to accept your seeds and germinate, and you have to wait for them to dry. By that time, it's summer, and you're just now planting cold crop. what this means is that me as a farmer who depends on a crop yield to take to market, to bring income to our farm, to sustain our work, we cannot plan accurately and in a way that allows us to keep a rhythm going where we have constant income coming in. So we're always making adjustments in terms of how are we going to get this food to the market, because you, the consumer, are waiting for us to get to market. And I don't know if you or your parents expressed last year not being able to get certain crops because they just were not available at the normal time that you expect them. Well, this would be the reason why. I traveled around the country last year, and I went to Louisiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, Buffalo. I was in Chicago, Indiana, and Ohio, and New Jersey. I saw a lot of vacant fields where normally by July the corn is about 6 feet tall. These fields were vacant. There was nothing in them. The growers could not get food seeds into the ground. And so this is what is happening around the country. It's causing us, the consumer, to have to pay more money when we go to shop. But you have to understand that the reason we're paying more money is because the cost of production has gone up because of what we're experiencing when it comes to these different weather events. And so, coming back to Detroit, I had the opportunity to speak to many of the local growers that I work with, and again, they're saying the same things that I already know, is that high winds, increased rain events, late frost, increased pest, city water contaminants. In Detroit, we rely on the City of Detroit water. And what we know is that there is a little bit of a water quality issue, because there are contaminants that are in our water that is not good for the crop. And so we have to look at ways to utilize capturing rainwater and at the same time preventing stormwater runoff that contaminates our water. And with city water, we pay for it. So that's a problem for us. And so at this time, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background information about what's happening around the country, in Michigan and in Detroit, and then move to our panel. And each of our panel members will talk for 10 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, probably 10, about their work. And then we will, after each, at the conclusion of that, we'll have some questions, and then we'll give you the opportunity to ask questions as well. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and I push this one? This one?
What's your very first clicker question? Make sure it's charged up and ready to go. They're going.
Do I say the question? Okay, which economic factors influence modern growers the most? A, genetically modified foods. B, cheap industrial food and the global market. C, demand for local or organic produce. D, retail stores and restaurants. Or E, all of the above. Do, 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 do. Oh, I can comment? Oh, okay. I was just telling everyone how good it is for your brain to sing. Okay, so can we? Looks like 11% think genetically modified foods. You would not be wrong. 45 cheap industrial food. Oh man, is that a big issue? You're not wrong. C, 10% demand for local organic food. You're not wrong. Retail stores and restaurants, something under the thing. And anybody, 59% of you are winners. Because the answer is E. That's right. You're all winners. Okay. Oh, this is my question. What percentage worldwide of fresh water usage is used for agricultural purposes to produce your food? What percentage of fresh water is being used? A, 25, B, 40, C, 55, D, 70. – 1% think is, oh, okay, changed the answer, good. Oh. Are people Googling this? Because you're right. 70% of fresh water is used for agriculture. So fresh water, incredibly important, right? 70% of our usage of fresh water goes for food production. It's, let's just say, not efficient. Okay, so I didn't click right for the question. Sorry about that. But hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Atkinson, and I am a co-director at Keep Growing Detroit. We are based in Detroit. We serve the residents of Detroit, Hamtramck, and Highland Park, and our mission is to promote a food sovereign city where the majority of fruits and vegetables that Detroiters consumed are grown by Detroiters for Detroiters within the city's limits. You'll notice that the word sovereignty is in our mission. That's by intent. We care deeply about sovereignty because I think there's probably as many definitions of sovereignty as there are people in this room, which I think makes it one of the most important things. But it's incredibly important because to us, sovereignty means that the people of Detroit have some say in the food that's available in the city. So what type of food is out there, if it's culturally appropriate, if it's affordable, and as important, if not more important, who benefits economically by our food system. Our vision for a food sovereign city is that there are places to grow food in every single neighborhood in the city of Detroit. So what a lot of people don't realize about Detroit is that there are many, many neighborhoods in the city. Some are less than 5% vacant, some are over 80% vacant, but there are about 25 square miles of vacant land in the city. And our vision is that in every single neighborhood in the city that there are places to grow food and that the places are appropriately scaled. So in very, very dense neighborhoods, you know, they're more pedestrian friendly, maybe smaller, and less dense communities can have larger farms, produce more food. But the issue is that places you grow food should be close to people. We've really separated agriculture and the act of growing food and understanding how to grow food from people and human cultures and economies, and that's part of the problem. So we see places everywhere, and we're getting pretty close to that in the city of Detroit. We're very, very lucky in that regard. The type of gardens and farms that Keep Growing Detroit serves is primarily in one of these four categories. So we have family gardens that are gardening sometimes in the backyard, but a lot of times in vacant side lots with one family typically. We have community gardens where there are more than one family gardening together, and they're typically open to the public or serving some sort of public good. We have market gardens where people are producing food for markets, mostly farmers markets, but some restaurants and retailers. And then we have school gardens, which in some cases are early childhood centers. We serve over 40 early childhood centers, sometimes public schools, sometimes other educational spaces, but it's typically a lot of people gardening in a smaller space with the intent, you know, to really teach people how to connect with their food. We actually serve 1,600 of these places across the city of Detroit, over 25,000 residents, which makes Detroit #1 in the nation. Yeah. In this map, you'll see that there are literally places to grow food in every neighborhood in Detroit, and that there are some really fun clusters. It's kind of contagious. The #1 way that gardens and farms find out about Keep Growing Detroit and our garden research program is through word of mouth, by far. And so it's a lot of neighbors introducing neighbors, or congregation members introducing congregation members, or family introducing family or friends. And you'll also see that we have this other category, which is called Partners in Food Sovereignty, because we are in fact growing ourselves out of a job. I think that's, really, if you're doing good work, that's what you're doing, is you're putting yourself out of work. And in our case, we want those folks that don't need us for seeds or plants or support anymore to stay in the community and actually mentor others, and teach classes or open up their spaces for events. And so we encourage them to stay in the community by becoming partners in food sovereignty, which we have a lot. So these are the beautiful people that we get to work with every single day, farmers and gardeners in the city of Detroit. They are utilizing a lot of sustainable practices. So Keep Growing Detroit, we definitely, the resources we provide, they're open pollinated seeds, over 95 varieties, unique varieties of seeds and plants, so a ton of diversity. We teach soil management, we teach composting, we teach cover cropping and crop rotation, all of the conservation practices that help farmers actually be forces of good for the environment. Keep Growing Detroit is very much at the forefront of teaching, and as a result, most of the gardens and farms that we work with, maybe they come to us really expecting to see a tractor every single year, but over time they realize that there's a lot of benefits for not pulverizing the soil year after year, right? There's a lot of benefits for soil conservation. We also teach a lot of water conservation techniques. We take soil tests before gardens are ever started. We're testing the soil to see kind of what we're working with, what the not only contamination of lead level is, but also the organic matter content, and try to improve whatever we find. You'll also see in the pictures that there's a lot of youth. Youth are a really integral part to our work and to a lot of our partners' work. Most of the groups that we work with are actively engaging youth throughout the year, but also in some cases employing youth through the summer. And intergenerational relationships are really critical, because in Detroit, a lot of the people with the gardening knowledge actually grew up down south and came up with the Great Migration, brought their agricultural skills, and are now passing them on to not only people in their family, but to neighbors and kids in the neighborhood. The other thing that's really important to the gardeners and farmers that we work with is that food is culturally diverse and culturally appropriate. We have a lot of gardeners who are bringing seed from the places that they were born, and the families that are growing ancient seeds, family heirloom seeds from around the country and the world. And the other thing that you should know about these gardeners and farmers is that a lot of them we hear about ourselves a lot in Detroit about how the city doesn't have great access to healthy food, which is the truth. And these growers, they have a lot of skill and they have a lot of talent, and they see themselves as not only the beneficiary of seeds and plants that Keep Growing Detroit gives away, but they see themselves as a part of the solution to making sure that their neighbors have access to healthy food, and that's really, really powerful. So the Rufino up top, and this young woman here in the Grown in Detroit apron are gardeners in our Grown in Detroit program. And so Grown in Detroit members sell at Eastern Market on Saturdays and Tuesdays throughout the year, and they make sure that healthy food is available at the Eastern Market to everyone visiting the market, from the folks in the suburbs to folks living in the city to folks that are utilizing nutrition assistance programs. So one of the most important things that I hope that you guys see in these pictures and kind of hear from myself and my co-presenters today is that one of the most important things that we're growing in Detroit Gardens and Farms is community. There are many, many reasons why Americans in general and Detroiters specifically are feeling isolated these days. Some of it is technology, right? But some of it is living in neighborhoods that are 50% vacant. There's a lot of isolation that goes into that. And so one of the things that is really important to us is that we're doing a lot of community organizing and connecting growers to one another. We hear from gardeners all the time that they form a lot of relationships through their work in the garden. And actually 43% of gardeners in the Garden Resource Program, which is one of the main programs that Keep Growing Detroit report, having met 10 or more friends, the people that they think of as friends as a result of being a part of the community. It's also really important because people have a lot of arguments in gardens. You wouldn't even believe it. So they argue about what is best to plant where, or how much of something to plant, or what to do if a problem arises. And this is an incredibly important practice of something called collective efficacy, right? So it's not enough just to know people, but when you're tested in those relationships, when you have something you don't agree on and you have to find common ground and come to consensus or agree to disagree, that's a really, really important skill that we're kind of losing in a large sense. So we're growing a lot of collective efficacy, ability to kind of not only know each other, but to tackle problems together in gardens. And that translates into all aspects of the city, whether it's, a neighborhood that needs a new stop sign to, electing policymakers. We're also dealing, as Jerry said, with a ton of issues, part of which are caused by the climate crisis. It's not climate change, right? We're actively in crisis. So last year, just as an example, we were 10 weeks late planting at the Keep Growing Detroit farm. So we missed our whole spring season. Gardeners have spring season, summer season, and fall season. We missed our whole spring season. And that meant that we lost at least $10,000 of revenue, which is incredibly important because we depend on that revenue for our staff. We have professional staff that need to get paid. And then, right when we got back into things and we got all of our summer crops in and we got our fall crops planted, did anybody enjoy the blizzard of October 2019? You guys remember that? It was insane. It was a foot of snow in October when we should be harvesting for Thanksgiving. So we had all this pressure to have all this delicious food ready for our Thanksgiving customers. And then this blizzard hits in October and it totally knocks us to our knees again. So 2019 was, pretty indicative. We also see things like the year before, 2018, we got our cold crops in on time, and then 2 weeks later we had an incredible spike in temperature, so that the temperature went up to July temperatures in May and June. And when cold crops experience that level of heat, they do something called bolting, and they're no longer good. So we did all the effort of putting in cold crops, and then they bolted, and we're left to deal with it. Many people don't understand how incredibly smart farmers are, how important they are, how much they know, how intuitive they are and connected to nature. Our society as a whole kind of treats farmers as dumb people that don't have any other options. And one of the things I would challenge everybody in this room to think about is what is your relationship to farmers? And what is your, what are the stereotypes that you think of farmers? And, unconsciously, how are you thinking about farmers and how are you connected to farmers? And I think if you do some soul searching, you'll find that maybe some of those stereotypes live in you, and that's one of the big things that needs to change because they're incredibly, incredibly important and intelligent. And so farmers are tasked with figuring out, like, how do I rebound from this really big thing? And then they're asked every single year to do it again, to assume the risk and to do all of the backbreaking work and to get pennies, for something that took them months and months and months to care for. And that's just the American, standard, and it's kind of whack. Hopefully we'll figure out how to fix that. So what are we doing? So with water, there's a number of things that we're doing to teach water conservation practices, but we're also, as Jerry said, doing a lot of rainwater collection and reuse. It's somewhat tricky because you have to get the right scale of a water vessel to the roof size, and also scale it to the amount of garden that you have to feed the water into. And then you have to get the timing right. If it's about to rain, you need to let all that water go, right, so you can catch it again. When you catch water, you're diverting it from the stormwater system, and you're diverting it ultimately when there's a lot of heavy rain from the Detroit River and the Great Lakes, which is really important work that farmers do every day, and they don't really get the credit for. We're also doing things like beekeeping. Keep Growing Detroit has a very robust practice of beekeeping. We have a beginner bee course that every beginner bee is paired with a bee mentor, an advanced beekeeper, and then they work together throughout the year to learn the craft of beekeeping, and then they become part of our bee club, and it's a pretty cool club. You guys probably want to be in it. And we also grow, not we so much as Akello up here. Akello is a farmer. Raise your hand, Akello. He's in the class. So Akello is a farmer at Keep Growing Detroit, and he's responsible for growing, about 250,000 transplants every year to feed Detroiters, and tens of thousands of native plants, including these guys in the photo. Native plants are really important because they're used all over the city in green stormwater infrastructure projects, and they're also used for pollinator and habitats, which are important for things like pest management as well as curb appeal. Related to soil, gardeners and farmers in Detroit are not only creating compost, mostly at a small scale, because it's not technically legal to do it at a large scale yet, but we're getting compost from other places as well and distributing that throughout the city, and we've done that for almost 20 years. And so thousands and thousands of cubic yards of compost have gone into gardens and farms across the city, which makes the soil really beautiful and smushy, which makes it able to really hold a lot of water and hold a lot of microorganisms. And then we're also engaged in some research. So we've done some research with folks looking at native bees. So for example, we know that there are more native bees in community gardens in Detroit than in many of the most pristine prairie land in the Midwest. Cool, right? And then recently we're engaged with some stormwater research looking at not only how much rain we can capture in collection systems and reuse, but also how much water urban ag soils are collecting and absorbing. And the answer is an incredible amount. Stay tuned for the full report. Last but not least, another thing that we're dealing with is that urban agriculture is at its best interdisciplinary and interesting to sectors ranging from health to urban planning to engineering. We're kind of interesting to all of those people, especially if they have a bend towards environmentalism. But at its worst, the reality is that we're not really agriculture. We're not really space making or place making, in urban planning settings. We have the interest of the minority, but we don't necessarily have access to the resources that some of the traditional farmers have through USDA programs, through Department of Agriculture programs, So we're really inspiring a lot of people, but we don't have the resources to match, and it's something that we're working on really carefully. In the 2018 Farm Bill, there were more measures put into that Farm Bill to support urban farmers than had ever been in a previous Farm Bill. So we are making some headway, but it's really slow going for some of us that have been at it for the last 20 plus years. Land is also something that's critically important, especially in the changing Detroit. I am happy to say that in 2013, about 22% of the gardens and farms that we work with owned their land. In 2018, over 76% owned the land that they were operating on. So we've worked really hard in a short amount of time to turn that on its head. And we're currently working with the city to do all sorts of innovative things, including a new real estate product for farmsteads in low-density communities. And then lastly, I am going to share a photo of Akello's rice project. I'm just going to, part of our questions can be directed to Akello because he's here too. But the title of this is The Plight of Urban Growers. And I would say it's both the plight of urban growers, but it's also the possibility of urban growers. So in places around the world where the majority of rice, one of the most important staples, is being grown in parts of Asia, for example, the sea levels are rising, right, all over the world, and salt water is getting into rice fields. Traditionally, they're saturated in water, and the salt in the water is making the rice no longer viable there, right? So there are millions of people leaving their land that are traditionally growing rice in Asia right now, and they're migrating because they what else are they going to do? And in Detroit, we're looking towards the past and rediscovering types of upland rice that used to be grown by Native Americans in the area. So it's rice that's not saturated underwater, but grown in the soil. And embracing upland rice as a possibility to both feed ourselves in the future and create opportunities for people who will be migrating because of climate change to every corner of the world that isn't underwater or mal-affected by climate change. And hopefully, part of our 25 square miles and part of our community of growing food and part of our ability to embrace diverse cultures through food will make us not a city that is really trying to hold on to its past, but maybe embracing its future partly through urban agriculture. And that's the end.
Thank you for that. Let's welcome Naeem Edwards.
Buenas noches. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. My name is Naeem Edwards. I'm going to try to multitask and get as close to all of you as I can. Read these notes on my paper and show you some slides. There's probably oh, cool. Is that my first one? No, it's not. Oh, we have a clicker question. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Do I have to do anything? Okay. Detroit farmers are most concerned about the curse of the lions. Megatron. Contaminated soil and clean water, food security, food sovereignty. Do I have to read off the screen? No, I can't see it anyway. You guys can read it. I don't need to read it to you. Right? Did the answer come up? Is it over yet? Oh. Do they get a minute? Does it matter? Are we done? Okay, they put C. I agree. When I was in school, I hated the best answer, framing of a question, because, who gets to determine what's best? Is there right or wrong? Anyway, I get to spend a good portion of my job just talking to Detroit farmers. I'll talk more about my job shortly. But in every conversation I have with people who grow food in Detroit, first and foremost, they say, I grow food because I want to feed people. I want my community to have better access to food. No one's like, I want to be a millionaire, or I want to retire early, or I don't know. People say that they want to grow for food sovereignty, as Ashley mentioned, and food security in their community. It's a beautiful thing. No one's growing cotton. Some people do want to grow marijuana and other non-edible foods, but that's for a different course. This is food literacy. Am I right, Lily? All right. So I work for the other university, as we refer to you guys, Michigan State. I went to U of M for grad school, though. Shout outs to Wolverines. And one thing that MSU, through extension, really focused on this year was farm stress, which I guess fortunately or unfortunately, as an urban agriculture extension person, I didn't have to. No one was asking me anyway for it. MSU actually did not provide any support for urban farmers, so I'll go ahead and blame them for that. But across the state, in more rural parts of Michigan, there were a ton of counseling courses set up, hotlines, and kind of multiple outlets for farmers to get in touch with. Jerry mentioned that suicide in the farming community in particular is increasing, which is crazy. It's like your life and your job are so bad that you think about killing yourself. Hopefully no one in this room ever has to be in that position, but that's the reality for a lot of folks. Too fast, Mr. Slide, or Mrs. Slide, or whatever gender you want to be, Slide. So, I graduated from U of M 2014. My advisor's name is John Vandermeer. He does agroecology work, mostly in the tropics. And I told John when I graduated, I'm going to start an urban agroecology center. I had no idea what that meant or what that would look like. And my first job, I worked in a small house. It had like 2 side lots. I did a rain garden and some small ag on there. And you fast forward to 2020, and I got hired to make this thing in this diagram a reality. Isn't that crazy? However, it wasn't framed as an urban agroecology site, but I think it's safe for all of us, including myself, to tell MSU that those are my intentions for the property. In a nutshell, this is a 3.5-acre site in northwest Detroit, close to 6 Mile Grand River. Any folks from Detroit in the room? Born in Detroit? High school in Detroit? Visited Detroit? Heard something about Detroit? Okay, cool. I'm actually from Pennsylvania. People are always like, you're not even from there yourself, man. I was like, I'm not. But you can see all the things in there. Essentially, the northern part of the site should be this recreational, educational extension space. The southern portion of the property, more urban agriculture oriented, soil management, pest management, variety crop trials, companion planting, anything and everything you think might be applicable or relevant to people who do urban agriculture. Next slide. I'm just going through these slides. They were supposed to be in the background, but since I can give you context for them, why not? Some of the biggest issues for agricultural production: pest resistance. Can anyone name either of those plants in there? Japanese morning glory, a vining plant. Velvet leaf, it's that top right one there. Bindweed is what most folks call the top left, and then the bottom left one, pigweed, or a type of amaranth. They were at our site and probably across most of Detroit some of the most common weeds found in gardens. And if you're ever driving along highways in Michigan, sometimes in a soybean field or a cornfield, they'll also be the most abundant plants there. Those weeds in particular are also developing resistance to a lot of chemical herbicides used. I'm not going to spend much time on here. Ashley did such a great job talking about stuff that I just get to pitch my ideological beliefs and values to the group. So this slide was supposed to show like all these dynamics. You got the local versus the global. In the middle picture in the top, there's raised beds versus like that far right one, which is like the infamous industrial agriculture photo. Bottom left is like this farmer spraying something on there. In the middle is one of my new kind of passions. I want to get into edible landscaping and perennial agriculture, permaculture. And then on the right is just this wonderful diagram I tried to use to talk about the economics around food. So food has really cheap cost. Some food's really expensive. You could go to like a super fancy restaurant in Ann Arbor, get like 2 ounces of steak, maybe, pay like $55. Or you could go to Coney Island and pay 99 cents for 8 ounces of beef. Farmers can grow organic spinach in a hoop house and then more or less be forced to sell that for the same price as spinach grown in any country you could think of that can grow spinach. So there's all these dynamics around like the economics of food. And then my favorite question is, why do we have to pay for food anyway? It's controversial to some degree. But we'll get into that. Should we go to this? Okay, this will be a nice foray, and then I'll speak more coherently the rest of my time. Where is carbon stored in soil? And I guess I can talk about carbon in soil. También. I like the Jeopardy song. It's actually a very wonderful song.
If you want group singing, that would be a good one. Yeah, you could just make everybody sing the Jeopardy song.
Anybody want to sing the Jeopardy song together? Okay, that's enough. We have to do that. A versus E. Plant roots. I guess that you guys would guess that. Or E. E is the correct answer. But on that note, microorganisms only really thrive in the soil because of plant roots. So, as we mentioned earlier, you're all winners. Okay. So I'm going to get back to the title, The Plight of Modern Urban Growers, which I now understand to be urban agriculture or modern growers. Did you guys know that before tonight? Is that what you guys meant when you said that? Jerry? Yes. Okay. If you're a modern grower, you're an urban grower. So take that, rural growers. I don't have anything against rural growers, by the way. Okay. On that note, urban growers are this multifaceted, multicultural, multi-objective group of people, right? There's some people who just grow stuff in their windowsill. Some people who grow stuff in their backyards. Some people have huge side lots. In Detroit, oh, there's so much land. It's so vacant. It's so cheap. Why don't you just buy it and grow lots of food? People always say stuff like that. I'm like, you try it. It's not that easy. Try to get that land. And then there's all these objectives. I mentioned and we saw that a lot of people said, hey, there's hungry people, there's food insecurity, there's people eating really crappy food. I want to grow healthy food for people. Some people say, hey, I moved to Detroit from New York, San Francisco, Houston, Oakland, wherever. Land was like super cheap here. I had some farm skills. Thought I'd try myself at a small business. I'll sell microgreens or something to restaurants. Make a livelihood for myself and have a little homestead operation going on. So there's like a full spectrum. There's even, there's a recovery park. There's like larger scale operations that are also kind of operating in the city. Some sell food, some give food away to food pantries, some only do farmers markets, some I don't know. I guess that's everything. Okay, what's hidden? The hidden plight. I put externalized cost, so I think a ton of folks work their butts off and are not compensated fairly for that. I put cultural norms are hidden. Norms of like individualism. If I own all this land, I have to farm it all by myself or depend on volunteers. Or I have to organize all these ways. There's not like this collective cooperative thing. And if it is, you call it a community garden. And then you separate that from like other types of growing. Cultural norms. It's normal to eat cheap processed food. It's normal to be super tired from working a ton, studying a ton, and just wanting to buy food, if you have money to buy food, at a place or a restaurant where they make food. If you grow it yourself, and you harvest it yourself, and you wash it yourself, and you prepare it yourself, you have no time to do anything else with your life, apparently. And if things got really bad, and you had to preserve it, or save it, or try to survive a long period of time on it, it would be nearly impossible, right? And these are like the norm. I just expect food to be on the grocery store shelf or in the restaurant down the street when I need it and when I want it. I put separation. So humans are constantly like putting things in these departments. That's a hidden plight of an urban farmer. You're an urban farmer. You can't do these other things. Although tons of urban farmers, I would say the majority have full-time jobs. Unless they're, well, yeah, a ton of them. Unless you're making the money on their own, you're like a teacher. Yeah. Teacher, contractor, architect, musician, whatevs. And then the plights, climate change, competition with cheap food, miseducation, soil quality, and I put anti-ag policies and a lack of support. So I did Peace Corps in Ecuador. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. You do Peace Corps in Ecuador. Ecuador is this wonderful country the size of Colorado, right on the equator. It's a tropical country. Kids would go outside, and there would be mangoes, and avocados, and bananas, and oranges, and grapefruits on the trees on their street. And they would go and harvest those things for game, for play. I'm just going to climb this tree, harvest as many mangoes as I can. What a great game. I was like, man, in Michigan, we could do that with plums, pears, pecans, apples, cherries, blueberries, hazelnuts, mulberries, elderberries, pawpaws, Saskatoons, persimmon, serviceberry, so many things. But we choose to plant our streets with sycamore, nothing against sycamores, maples, oaks, locusts. Why? Why can't we plan our cities to just have all these things be out and about and our kids go and play? Who can get the most blueberries today? No reason. No reason. Why can't we do that? In Detroit, in addition to not intentionally planting food across this food desert city with tons of soil that could grow all kinds of food we eat, has policies that prohibit growing types of food, where you can grow food, having animals, can you compost, how much compost can you make, all this stuff. And Detroit isn't unique in that. Cities across the country have policies that prohibit people from growing things we can eat. So I think I'll wrap with that. The end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce Michelle Martinez.
Get this thing. If folks want to take a deep breath or move around, stand up, if you choose, you know, like I slept wrong on my neck and I'm like doing this to like look up at the slide. Like if you choose to move your neck or like your arms, it's really important to keep in your body because I'm the bad news bearer tonight, y'all. I have the misfortune of talking about the pollution side of climate change tonight. And I'm not going to bombard you with statistics or things that you can Google about why climate change is happening or how we begin to deal with the issue. I'm going to talk about my vantage point and how the work that I've been doing through the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition really is trying to work through the lens of what social justice and climate activism mean through the lens of environmental justice. And I think they're super, super critical, right? Yesterday, Consumers Energy announced that they're going to net zero by 2040. And while that is very good news, we have to analyze and excoriate as humans what that means for us, right? And so the talk today is thinking a little bit about what the critical framework of survivance is for Detroit, really, for Metro Detroit, for we who live in the place that's 89% of the nation's fresh water, right? We should take really seriously our role as stewards, our role as folks who care for water, who care for earth, and who care to repair the relationships that we have with one another and also with the lands that we stand on. So again, the critical nexus that I'm working through is something that we're really supporting with other national organizations, small organizations who are thinking climate change can be resolved. We can fix it. We can also resolve the issues of social injustice through climate action and activity. But unless we're asking the questions about how that's done and where we are as humans living in our communities, we won't come up with the right answers. So I'm going to start with a case study. This is the library of Salina Elementary in South Dearborn. Who knows where Dearborn is? Ooh, yeah, Dearborn, right? Home of Ford Motor Company, right? And this hearing is a hearing that was hosted by then MDEQ in the library, where about 100 people crammed into this room, and there were 30, 40, maybe 50 more in the hallway and down the stairs. Why were they there? Because Consumers Energy and a subsidiary of Consumers Energy had proposed expanding a natural gas facility directly across the street from Salina Elementary. The air quality monitor that sits on the parking lot of Salina Elementary registers the highest air pollution in the entire state of Michigan, right? It's home to the largest concentration of Yemeni and Yemeni Americans living in South Dearborn, already subject to steel companies, the River Rouge factory, Dearborn Industrial Generation. There's about 33 industrial smokestacks that surround this community, right? You had people asking, why would you do this? Why would you propose expanding yet again another industrial facility in a place that we already can't breathe? We already miss school because our kids can't breathe. The teachers there saying, this is the community that I want to teach in because it's culturally appropriate, because I want to teach the kids who come from Yemen because I came from Yemen 2 decades ago, and you're making it impossible for me because the kids leave school because of asthma attacks, right? People speaking in Arabic and there was no Arabic translator in there, right? So the issues that we have around pollution, right, are very real and they're happening every day. This case study was in the spring, April of 2018, and within a 3-month period, we had gotten 3 natural gas expansion or proposals in Southeast Michigan. The Dearborn Industrial Generation, we defeated that, and Consumers Energy actually rolled that back. But we realized that this was a part of a much bigger problem. And this is where I get to grind my axe at DTE Energy. Because, yeah, go ahead, grind that axe with me too. Ooh, feels good, okay. Because what they're planning for us and what we are all paying for every time we pay our DTE bill is the build out of another generation of natural gas and fossil fuel burning facilities, right? They have planned, and this is from their consumer reports to their shareholders, is really a near $24 billion expansion of their natural gas infrastructure over the next decade. They're building out the pipelines through Washtenaw County, through the Nexus and the Rover pipelines. Who are familiar or aware of this, right? And building mostly for an export market, because the gas that would be extracted from the Marcellus Shale at the Ohio border would be transported across the Great Lakes in another pipeline to be either turned into liquefied natural gas for exportation and made into plastics, right, which we all know and love, or sold to Canada for energy, right? So a lot of this is a huge systemic issue that we had 3 proposals in just 1 season, right? So it's a really big problem. Again, DTE shareholder reports. This is a 2017 report, and it might be changed now that their IRP, that we just, mess with their IRP. But in 2016, they were burning coal at 61%. The 2030 scenario that they were proposing was to reduce their coal to 40%, and then by 2040, just transferring that to a natural gas system, right? There's nothing natural about natural gas, but we expect that that kind of burning of fossil fuels is going to not eliminate greenhouse gases. Ooh, where did that picture go? Oh, but increase the amount of methane that's going into the atmosphere. So you can Google methane as a greenhouse gas, and DTE will tell you, well, we have an 80% reduction target of greenhouse gases by 2040, which is great when you think about it, right? Because that sounds like a whole lot, right? But when you start including the life cycle analysis, you can see where the methane emissions are actually happening. They're happening at the point of extraction. They're not happening at the same point of burning, right? With coal, the greenhouse gas emissions are coming right out of those smokestacks, right? They're coming right out of River Rouge, they're coming right out of Trenton, they're coming right out of St. Clair, and that's why we fought so hard to close those coal plants, right? And we're still fighting the closure of those coal plants. But this methane thing is a new beast, right? And it means we need to start pushing on life cycle analysis of how DTE Energy and other energy companies are making decisions about our climate future. So again, I mentioned that the 3 gas plants, we have the approval that was forced through the Michigan Public Service Commission in the final hours of the Snyder administration, and East China methane burner. That would be a 35-year plant. So you can imagine that if it's going online right now, that thing won't close until 2055, right? It's going to cost $1 billion of our money, and it's going to provide 35 full-time jobs. In a comparative analysis with renewable energy, a combination of energy efficiency and energy storage, it was $336 million cheaper to do exactly the same amount of energy and provide that to the residents and industry of Southeast Michigan, and it would create 10 times more jobs, right? So we knew through the MPSC that some of these false solutions that have been being put forward, right, that look really good when DTE says net zero by 2050, we have to look just below the surface to see what they're actually doing, right? And we don't know just yet what consumers would do to reach net zero either. Ford and in East Dearborn, they were approved, DTE, for another methane burner, 250 megawatts, actually on the Ford Motor Company property. So, important thing for you all to know, if you don't know already, who's read the Clean Air Act? Right, that girl. That was me. So the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are currently how we regulate air quality emissions. That's what people in South Dearborn were talking about when they went to the permit hearing for the new gas plant. They were like, hey, we're already out of attainment for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards in sulfur dioxide and in ozone. Can you just stop poisoning in accordance with current law, right, in the Clean Air Act? That's what they were asking for, okay? With climate, we're asking for, can you just not poison us and kill all of life on Earth by regulating greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide and methane, right? So those are the things that we need to be looking at in terms of life cycle analysis when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about these things. Traditionally, climate activists have talked almost exclusively only about carbon dioxide. And in some cases, climate policy and climate reduction strategies have resulted in the increase of these other pollutants in neighborhoods across the United States, because they can trade through cap and trade, or they can buy carbon offsets, and that increases this other pollution by allowing those companies to buy it somewhere else, to buy a credit. Not all climate activism is environmental justice. Not all climate activism is going to lead to the alleviation of the situation that we see in South Dearborn. Okay? So, the idea. Who's my math people? Hey, raise your hand. You can clearly see I'm not a math person. So, environmental justice plus climate activism to the power of social justice is looking at the past harms, right? So what is the shit that we've already done that is so terrible that needs to be taken care of? And how far do we need to go back to understand what justice actually means for the people who have borne the brunt of injustice for so long? Can you imagine that 90% of the old growth forests in Michigan were torn down, completely razed from 1830 to 1920? And on whose land was that done, right? When we start to think about slavery, settlement, and colonialism as a part of how we rectify what has happened in the past, that gets to a climate justice equation. When we start to talk about the current issue of the toxic contamination, exposure, lack of investment, foreclosure crisis, joblessness, and lack of health care, that's a climate justice equation. When we talk about what is now known, which Trump just, took out from federal requirements, reasonably foreseeable future from all planning inside of environmental decisions, we need to talk about the vulnerabilities of the shock of climate disruption. We talked about the increased costs of food. Who's going to feel that first and hardest? How can we plan for that? And then the transformative future, which we're all working for together, resolving and accounting for the societal harms through a regenerative economy. So I don't want DTE to just stop producing methane. I want them to give me my money back so I can put community solar in my community and they can send me a $400 paycheck every month. That's the kind of regenerative economy. When we talk about, is it real? Yes, it's real. It's possible. There are big thinkers who are trying to resolve it, who are trying to fight for it, who are marching in the streets, and who are saying things that may be disruptive, that may be oppositional, that may be hard, right? But it's the fight for our lives, and it's the fight for our planet. So thanks so much for dealing with me.
Sure, you can, yeah. So we have about 15 minutes for questions, but I do have, first of all, give them another hand. This panel is out of sight. It's out of sight. And there are so many possibilities here. But the question that I have for each one of you as we look at climate justice, social justice, environmental justice, what can we do? What can we all do? Just one thing each of us can do. And then the other question I have, and this, let me ask my questions one at a time. So answer that one first. What can we do?
So my favorite thing, and I think the easiest thing, is to eat less meat. But in the department of food consumption, I used to be, and I'm not so much that guy anymore, but when I went to restaurants, I would be like, do you pay your employees fairly? Where did you get the kale from? And where was the pork made? Oh, okay. No, I don't want that. How about this bean burger? And I don't know if you have to be that scrutinous. You could just go to restaurants where you know or trust how they make food, but being more disciplined and willing to sacrifice anything that you know contributes and perpetuates directly to inequity and climate change. Like, hey, I really like burgers. I really like eating at this particular restaurant. I really like driving 40 minutes to this particular place or something like that. Simply working on changing the habits that, and maybe if that's too much of a first step, the first thing could simply be identifying how you contribute to climate change. And a lot of us, you know, we have the privilege as Americans, or maybe whatever our lifestyles are, to be really detached from being concerned about that. But when you wake up, like, am I gonna put on clothes that were made in Bangladesh and dyed here and made from GMO cotton and blah, 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 blah. And am I gonna hop in my car, or am I gonna get on a bus, or am I gonna bike, or am I gonna carpool, or am I gonna invite someone to carpool with me? That kind of stuff. So one would just be identifying the ways that you contribute to climate change. And once you kind of have that list of things, just start picking stuff to say, hey, I'm not going to buy my clothes here. I'm not going to buy this kind of clothes. I'm not going to eat this kind of food. And then you're intentionally, without necessarily changing policy or having arguments with your family or your neighbors, just saying, hey, I'm doing what I can. I'm making sure that I'm doing what I can to make a difference.
Organize. You know, if you don't have 10 people that you can call and be like, this shit is fucked up, we need to go to this place right now and tell them to do this, then you're not doing enough. It's going to take every single person and 10 of their friends to change the power structure around all of the options that we have, right? Because, yeah, like, I want to make good personal choices. And after I work 60 hours a week, I try to do that, you know? But capitalism is destroying the fabric of our society. And unless we change the underpinnings of what and how decisions are made and who gets to decide who lives and dies on this planet, then, like, I really am worried. I'm really concerned. I'm really at the edge of climate fatalism. And I want you all to take that very seriously, too. If you don't have the time or the privilege to be able to do that, and you have another way to just talk, right, and be with the people who are around you, I think that there is immeasurable value in living the way that you can, given your means, right? But movements, laws don't change without thousands of people in the street, right? And that's how policy is made. Policy is not made by some great idea inside of the Buttigieg campaign, right? Like, policy is made by thousands of people in the street demanding it.
Sorry. So a couple of things. It's very similar to what Naeem was saying, but you all are in school, or maybe not all of you are in school, but who here has read anything written by Paulo Freire? Okay, right? So he's got this idea of critical consciousness. And sometimes it's just helpful to kind of sit with a brilliant person's idea to try to understand it in your own way. But basically, critical consciousness says that if you know something, so first of all, we only know what we know. And your job isn't to be perfect, right? There's nobody that's perfect. But going through your life, you learn things, and a lot of you are in school, and you're learning a lot about how every micro decision in your life impacts other people's lives, impacts our future, our environment. And critical consciousness says that you have a what is the word I'm looking for? You have not only a need, but you have a duty. You have an obligation to act. And particularly, as Michelle's last slide, kind of showed, if you do not act, you are benefiting from and contributing to, in a lot of ways, oppressing other people. It's really serious. And so I would encourage you to just think about maybe reading up a little bit on a critical consciousness and trying to just let it settle in your head, and it'll become part of your decision making and your thought process. And I think that's important. The other thing, I'm a lot of years out of school, and I will tell you, in the real world, it is incredibly important to learn finance. Learn finance, understand budgeting, understand how financial decisions are made, and before you take no for an answer, before you settle for something, ask to see the budget and understand it for yourself. Because a lot of people make bad decisions, and then they say it's a budget decision, and unless you look at that budget and understand it and can propose an alternative, you back down. That is the one thing that I think that all disciplines should understand. When you're in a 10-year degree career in sociology, you still need to know what the budget is and how to read it and how to influence it. It's incredibly important. And then the last thing is, I think we need to think about our lives with less. And what I don't mean is less meaning or less community or less joy or less time. I think what I mean is less stuff, less shit, less things we don't need that collect dust, that are literally killing us and jeopardizing future generations. So think about your life differently. Think about a life with less. And I can tell you there are people living in Detroit with less who are incredibly happy and whose lives are incredibly meaningful, who are making a great life. So think about a great life. Think about less, and think about what you would do when the apocalypse comes, because it could be coming.
You have another question?
No, I think I'll close with that. That was.
Yeah, so I forgot to belatedly welcome our friends who are live streaming tonight in Kalamazoo. And we actually have a question coming in from Kalamazoo at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. So is it okay if we have a minute to pose a question? Okay, here's the question. This is from Rachel Chatterton Bear in Kalamazoo. Hey, Rachel, who also says hi and I love you. But here's the question. How do you think small and urban growers are thinking of themselves as small business owners? How does the business aspect of farming weigh relative to social, cultural, and political aspects? And do you think most growers are striking a healthy balance? You want me to? I can take that.
I think that is a hard question, right? The people, as Naeem said, people do not go into this to get rich, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they should live in poverty because they're trying to feed their neighbors, right? So I think that in some cases, we work with a lot of market gardeners who have businesses. So I'll just share a statistic, right? So Grown in Detroit works with around 60 growers every single year, supporting them and getting them access to the marketplace so that they can sell their vegetables and learn entrepreneurial skills. Since 2006, Grown in Detroit has incubated out over a dozen farm-based businesses, and 100% of those farm-based businesses are still in business, which is incredible. But they're small businesses, mostly they're family businesses, and in some cases they have employees, but they're seasonal, right? But we have a long way to go, frankly, and I think as a lot of millennials are learning, right, this idea of portfolio careers is a real thing. Meaning, a lot of people are piecing together full household incomes through multiple streams of income. And this is another reason why you should learn finance, because if you understand finance, you understand, what your budget requires and what you're bringing in, you have a lot of independence, you have a lot of power, you can piece together an income that suits the kind of life that you want to have. And for a lot of people, farming is absolutely a part of the equation, but there's no farms in the city that are purely for profit, that are making a huge margin. It's just not something that's happening.
But to that point, I think it's a balance between the quality of life. It's some choices that you make. I know with my own family, my own husband, we walked away from, corporate and from other things to do farming, and we're a lot happier. So it's a quality of life. We don't make a lot of money, and that's not the reason that we do this work, but we're much happier.
So I don't know anything about farming business, but it's just a massively fucked up societal equation that we have to choose to live in poverty to eat food. That is so morally bankrupt. And we have to take a stand to say that if it's the Green New Deal that's going to pay people so that they can have a dignified life to grow our food, then we must demand that so that the moral equation actually changes. And that's the power differential. I want to pay Naeem to make sure that he's sequestering carbon in all the right ways and not some weird fictional vacuum in Vancouver that's sucking carbon out of the air to force it in the ground. It doesn't make sense. And so I just am so challenged to say, you should be the queen of the world and not be making that decision, it's so frustrating. Anyway.
I love her. Let's open up for questions. Did you have anything?
A little bit.
Oh, a little bit.
Quick smidge to that question. The system is messed up, and I do think that the question needs to extend beyond just growers as a business and the business mentality. I feel like culturally the business has this dog eat dog, every man for himself or herself or theirself approach. And we need to have an integrated approach to, I'm going to pursue a model that will allow me to hopefully meet my needs, but I'll also pursue a model that allows me to be able to have an integrated approach and do cooperative things. So I'm not simply trying to make money to stay in my own house, but in Detroit we have this land-based projects homesteading-ish program, farmstead, where hopefully you can get matched with land and a house. So combining the housing question or the housing issue with the food issue, with the job issue, and say that we're actually working towards these integrated systems that allow people to be able to sustain themselves without having to be completely dependent on income.
Thank you. I know it's getting late. Are there any questions from you guys? Now's the time. Okay.
There's one. Wait, yeah, B.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm wondering if you guys have examples of rural-urban farming partnerships that are giving you hope or that you feel like are really going towards a more just economic system?
The Michigan Flour Cooperative. That's B's business.
Other.
Okay.
Just through my work with Michigan State, my site is the first urban ag research site. There's 13 other rural ag research sites. So just within our network, I've been trying to create mechanisms for having seeds shared, having farm tools shared, having compost and other resources shared from these entities that have huge sheds of tractors and huge seed banks. And I'm like, can I just have 50 pounds of that? And they'll be like, sure. Or can I bring some guys out to see how you guys use this tractor? Sure. So within the Michigan State framework, there's a ton of farms through the university and rural settings that have a lot of resources that I'm trying to leverage to share some of that with the Detroit folks and folks in other urban cities.
Anybody else? There's one in the back.
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm an undergraduate student here. So you talked a lot about how obviously everything within public health and especially the food system is all interconnected. And then you also talked about how farmers are having trouble finding people to take over their land because a lot of students, a lot of kids like our age, a little bit older, don't necessarily want to go into the farming business. Do you know of any ways where, because the unemployed population, that is a thing, and because even though there are people who are employed but are still below the poverty line, is there a way to give that land to those people to give them an opportunity to have a job, or do you know of anything that kind of goes along those lines?
So there's numerous examples nationwide. So like the Agrarian Trust would be one. There are, Detroit is very unique. The reason why a lot of farmland is transitioning away from farmland is because the land is so valuable, both for development purposes as well as speculation. I mean, that's one thing that we didn't talk about at all today, which is the incredible amount of speculation that exists in the financial markets. Arable land is being purchased by huge conglomerates and put into retirement portfolios, and it's incredible. So there's a lack of land, and part of the reason why there's a lack of land is because people who are ready to be new young farmers or just new farmers, they have the proposition of paying a mortgage or paying a rent plus turning a profit on fruits and vegetables, which we've talked a little bit about how hard that is. So urban agriculture presents a really amazing opportunity in that in places like Detroit, for the moment, in some areas, the value of land makes the profit, the numbers work, right? So the rent or the mortgage would be low enough to make a profit, potentially. And in other cities, there's that possibility, but I've been to community gardens in California that an acre is worth, over $3 million. So that's also in the spectrum.
We're going to let this be our last question, but we'll be around after class. I know you guys are biting at the bit to start your break.
So my question is for the panel. In your guys' experience, what have been some of the best practices for food safety on urban farms for things like soil contamination in places like Detroit?
So, food safety?
Does this mic work? Wow,
Okay.
I've just been passing around
I'll
this
speak
thing.
to the work that we do at our farm, and we're farming. Our footprint is 6 acres. We're actually growing food on 3.5 acres. We soil test everything prior to planting. We have not encountered a soil contamination as of yet. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed as we spread. But soil testing, I would say, would be one way. And another way is when there is leaching in the soil or some contaminations, using raised beds. But I'll let somebody else speak to that.
So we've tested thousands and thousands of samples, and we only find that there are elevated issues in about 13 to 17%, so take an average. So the vast majority of land that we're testing is good, actually more than good. And let me say this very clearly. There are no food standards in the United States for contaminants. Urban growers are testing their soil. Rural growers are not.
There's also a paper, super quick, ScienceDaily.com. Kansas City State University has an article published called "With Proper Care, Contaminated Urban Soils Are Safe for Gardening." essentially there's a whole like protocol from mulching with wood chips to covering to simply knowing how to avoid getting dust from contaminated soil on plants or on yourself. So if you know, if your soil's tested and it is contaminated, there's a ton of ways to do that, and the likelihood that it's contaminated is also generally pretty low.
I would say stay connected with your EJ organizations, and you can sign up on our list here. We did not receive notification that a historic Manhattan site collapsed into the Detroit River. The Army Corps of Engineers waited 10 days to tell Eagle. There are 9,000 historically contaminated sites all over Michigan that threaten all of our drinking water every day. So the idea that we should be rigorous and vigilant about protecting our food sources is a very real equation. And watchdogging the state on how they're regulating and strengthening those regulations, and then cleaning it up, right? So that that potential risk is reduced. And I won't say eliminated, because our cleanup is to dig it up and put it somewhere else, or to cap it. So I know that there are folks in the room who have probably been working on the Gelman plume for a very long time, right? Just being rigorous about making sure that we're commonly, as a commons, aware of our environment.
Thank you. I want to take another opportunity to thank our panel and to thank you for being so patient and engaged. And I wish you a happy break. Be safe.